Welcome to another edition of The Need for Courage, produced by Marquette's Center for Peacemaking. With me today is Basir Bita. Among other things, he's a clinical counselor at the Multicultural Trauma and Addiction Treatment Center of Wisconsin, but has done a number of other things in the peacemaking and adjacent stage throughout his career. So first of all, thank you so much, Basir, for joining us today. And I guess I'll start off with this. What drew you to Marquette, and talk a little bit about there and how that's assisted you in your career path and the journeys that you've been on?
My journey with Marquette dates back 13, 15 years ago almost, when I met Pat Kennelly for the first time visiting Afghanistan. And, something clicked in me that he's the right guy. So he and I exchanged email addresses, phone numbers, and we've been in touch. He and I ran an online class for Afghans focusing on nonviolence and peace education. And then right after, around the time of the fall of Afghanistan, when the U.S. forces were pulling out from Afghanistan on August 15, 2021, he reached out to me offering me a scholarship to come and study in Milwaukee. And the field that I chose was mental health counseling, because I was seeing at that moment, not only in my country and people around me, but also around the world, that mental health is a necessity. And I appreciate, Center for Peacemaking for raising enough fund for me to come and study at Marquette. And the reason that I am still working with an agency and people in Milwaukee is because Milwaukeeans give me an opportunity to come and get a degree from Marquette. And now it's my time to give back to Milwaukeeans.
That's great. You mentioned the fall of Afghanistan, and obviously we're all aware of, from a strategic standpoint, how disastrous that was, regardless of your politics. I think everybody on all sides of the political spectrum felt that. What is it about Afghanistan today that people might not know? What are some of the continuing challenges of people there, and how does that relate to some of the work that you're doing?
Just to briefly list some of the top most significant challenges that Afghans deal with, is one of them is the current regime is not being recognized internationally. It's a de facto regime. The second is that women, girls and women are not allowed to go to school, are not allowed to work outside home. Recently, almost 2 weeks ago, the latest Taliban's decree to eliminate women and girls from the societal level was issuing a decree that women under age of 18 or girls under 18 are okay to be married. So the third one that I would say is the blockage of the fund that belongs to Afghan citizens by the U.S. government. The fourth is Afghanistan's contribution to carbon emission is extremely tiny, but is one of the top countries that being impacted by climate change. So drought, lack of access to potable water, local underwater resources are drying up, lack of economic opportunities, prosecution of minorities, and yeah.
That's a whole host of challenges, obviously. What are some of the strategies or organizations and organizations that are working to try to, address all of these amazing difficulties? What are some of the things that are going on that perhaps people that are listening to us today could either contribute to financially or some other way?
There are many initiatives started right after the fall of Afghanistan. There's a huge focus on providing free education for women and girls. And I have seen hundreds of thousands of people already, girls and women, they call it underground schools. So they have access to some sort of education, but it's all online. There are amazing people working on the ground trying to promote the idea of organic farming. I'm involved with one of the 8 local agencies, and they try to teach permaculture. There are organizations that advocate for women's rights, minority rights, but the number is really trivial. But it's encouraging.
So that's going on globally. So there's global support for that. Has there been any harm done with the U.S. reducing things like USAID and other issues? I'm assuming there's less funding than there used to be, right?
Yeah, there's less funding, less development opportunities. As long as the government is not recognized, really complicated. There is no way that you can get money into the country.
I've read also that you've done a lot of work in terms of translating, my words, correct me if I'm wrong, texts and other reports and other documents that deal with nonviolence and
Yes.
translating them into local language. Tell us how those projects go, and how is it's obvious how that would be helpful, but describe why it is important to do things like that.
So all my translation with regards to nonviolence has been voluntarily. I have published them online. I have printed them and handed them over to people. There used to be some copies of the books that I have translated in local public libraries, as well as some private libraries. The PDF version is still available on different platforms in 2 local languages. And I think it's inspiring just to see how people there's a hunger, to learn more about nonviolence and peace, especially in current situation. With the U.S. military presence in 2 decades in Afghanistan, the peace had different connotation and indication. But now nowadays people talk about nonviolence and peacemaking, they mean something else.
What do you mean by that?
Well, people feel like education is part of peacemaking, having access to education, being able to establish dialogues, being able to sit with big feelings and emotions. I'm also involved in a monthly mental health workshop for Afghan women and girls. And women, because of the psychological impact of being ostracized, being suppressed, even during the U.S. invasion, women were being constantly and continuously suppressed in governmental level, in local level, and even in family level. So just people now are more interested in learning how to have sustainable sources of income rather than being totally dependent on international aids. People are more curious to know how they can galvanize their own resources to share those resources with one another. And I'm also engaged with a monthly circle where we sit and we both brainstorm and heartstorm about issues that are going on in the country. And we also discuss the Afghan diaspora communities challenges and what Afghan diaspora communities can do for people inside Afghanistan.
When you came to Marquette in, I think you said in 2021, you obviously had a predilection for supporting peace. What was work with the center and classes at Marquette? What did that do to maybe expand? I won't say your knowledge, but as you've already said, peacemaking is a very broad.
Yeah,
it should be considered a very broad category, not a narrow, like just simply anti-war or what have you.
right.
You make a very strong case that is broader than that. What did the Center for Peacemaking do to help add to your already pretty broad level of knowledge and expertise in this area?
So that's a topic that I need days and months to elaborate on. But to summarize it, is just, going to Center for Peacemaking and seeing that what they do for local residents. I was just studying about them, going to this Center for Peacemaking, seeing how younger generation were learning about nonviolence and peacemaking and committing themselves to improve the livelihood, to make impoverished population of Milwaukee to have access to very basic human needs. Just seeing that people dedicating some of their time working voluntarily, seeing Center for Peacemaking and Pat Kennelly and his family involved in promoting peace and engaging in supporting refugees, immigrants, their international involvement across the world, India, El Salvador, Afghanistan, some other countries. and having conversation with the volunteers, with employees, with people benefiting from Center for Peacemaking services inspired me to get back to sort of get back to my original idea of establishing a Nonviolence Institute. Initially, I was thinking of establishing it only in Afghanistan, but now seeing the global need for practicing and integrating nonviolence as a way of being, as a way of living, as a way of speaking, as a way of carrying yourself throughout the day, as a way of being kind and compassionate towards yourself and towards your community and the world and other sentient and non-sentient beings in existence, generations before you and people that will come. So that inspired me a lot. And I have started reaching out to people, meeting new people as I live in Canada, expanding my own network of connection, peacemaking in Canada. And I'm now deeply involved with Canadian peacemakers.
That's great. And I know that, as you just mentioned, you've done work not only as a clinical counselor, but also, again, the volunteer work you do with refugees and migrants, particularly now through the chaos that's been going on for the past couple of years. I've interviewed a number of folks. I interviewed a priest who's originally from Minneapolis. He talked about the horrific acts going on there. Obviously, there's so much else out there. I saw a report in the U.S. that at least 500 babies are in captivity. It's a horrible word because of what's happening. So, what are some of the things you've been able to do from a mental health perspective of these refugees? Because as you just said, the women in Afghanistan, given the severe limitation of their lives, of course, are going to have a mental health reaction. But just in general, refugees or even people who get deported after being in the U.S. for so many years.
Yeah.
I know we could talk hours about that, but talk a bit about some of that and the importance of mental health, the area that you're an expert in, for those individuals and people and families.
I can tell you a little bit about my own story,
Please.
Being born in Iran as a refugee right after Soviet invasion in 1979, when my parents had to leave Afghanistan to survive. And then after the U.S. invasion in 2003, I decided to go back to Afghanistan because that was my motherland. And then as a minority, I come from a background where my ancestors, with the support of British Empire, there was a serious acts of genocide against the specific minority ethnic groups that I belong to. It started in 1880, and again with the colonial support of British Empire. So I have been carrying unhealed wounds and trauma, intergenerational trauma, being a refugee, being sexually molested many, many times and rape and, as a refugee. And then coming to Canada, seeing the racism, how institutionalized racism is. And then I had some encounters of racism, and I see how racism takes a toll from BIPOC communities across the United States and in Canada as well. And working with refugees as a mental health professional, I've also seen how debilitating it is for refugees not have enough support, building walls. I have been working on the idea of a border-free world, but now people like Trump, they have been trying to build walls and, separate us from each other. And I've seen how important it is for myself to heal from my own unhealed traumas and wounds that I've been carrying with myself and pass it down to my kids. And then providing free services for refugees, Afghan refugees. I've seen a lot of trauma going on. And it's not only about living in that part of the world or this part of the world, you would experience less trauma. That's just a myth. Trauma is everywhere. And I have seen really horrible trauma systematically happening in North America that people don't talk a lot about.
I'm sure that, not much I can respond to based on that. I really appreciate you sharing that. So it's so important folks like yourself that have had many, many struggles that as you said up front, you're giving back to the communities in terms of counseling, in terms of volunteering, working, and obviously the Center for Peacemaking, that's what they're all about, right? Not just the students that go to the center, but
Yes.
hopefully you're encouraging students throughout Marquette University
Yes.
to do things either locally or internationally. So what makes a good mentor? What makes somebody, obviously yourself is a great example, to mentor the next generation and generations after that to understand, again, the breadth of peacemaking that you've pointed out, but
Mm.
also the health impacts and how to address that. Even if you're not, like yourself, an expert in mental health, you can still obviously help in
Yes.
some way. So
Yes.
talk a bit about that.
Something that I appreciate about Center for Peacemaking is that they that the center is a manifestation of how broad, deep you can engage in peacemaking. Peace is not all about security or anti-war. It's about education. It's about providing and caring for each other. It's about community work. It's about connection. It's about respect. It's about improvement and development and listening to stories. Something that I admire truly about the Center for Peacemaking is that you go there and people listen to your story. No matter who you are, what you have accomplished, what you have gone through, what your social status or economic status is, I went personally to Center for Peacemaking and I had a huge audience listening to my story. That was also healing. The work that Center for Peacemaking has been doing and I witnessed also includes healing. Peacemaking is a healing. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. No, 100% does. And it's as simple as listening, but it's as complicated as what are the different lanes we can go to be helpful beyond that. But I think, everything in life is about communicating, but also that doesn't mean just preaching. It means
Right.
listening and hearing. And even if you can't fully understand the person who's sharing with you, as you say, there's a healing process of simply hearing what they're sharing and learning from that. So I do know you clearly have answered the question. You write a number of things in your Substack, everything from poems to just reports or my
Yeah.
word reports, but analysis of things. Talk a bit about the content that you're creating in your Substack, which we will link to the notes when we post our conversation.
Wonderful. So I have started writing on Substack, sharing my poems, my own personal experience, my own reflection from mental health to nonviolence, peacemaking, refugee crisis, environmental catastrophes, how we can get closer, how we can become. My latest post is on curiosity and how you can tap into the power of curiosity and heal. And, getting back to listening to other people's stories. Sometimes I feel that I need to listen to my own story again and again. And my reflections on Substack are basically a reflection of my own lived experiences and just sharing it with people.
And there's a catharsis. It's cathartic to share, obviously, as you point out. So I think that's important. Like I said, we will link to your Substack. One of the many things that you're involved in and all the things that you do is issues related to anti-corruption. And while it's obvious that corrupt governments impact populations, I don't think it's always as obvious how it can affect the health, whether physical or mental. So any administration, and we're not talking specifically about the U.S., but any any governmental entity that thrives on corruption and grift and all those sorts of things. What's the real life impact on populations when that happens?
One of the topics that I really love from bottom of my heart is anti-corruption. And I am back in Afghanistan. I was working with an agency that was funded partially by the U.S. government. So one way that I have come to terms to understand corruption better and how corruption plays out and shows up in our day-to-day life is just we need to decolonize the whole idea of corruption. The quote unquote expats coming to Afghanistan and telling us what corruption is based on their own definition of corruption. And now living in North America for a few years, I have seen that how different corruption can shows its thousands or millions different faces. And I have seen that even definition of corruption is not neutral, is not universal, and it varies from culture to culture. I think the way that I have experienced corruption is really, really deep. It's multi-layered. I have seen colonial corruption happening in North America.
Right.
Even me telling North America is a colonial way is a euphemism. I have seen structural corruption that the people don't tend to talk about. We have corporate corruption. We have epistemic corruption. Epistemic corruption is something that people might struggle to understand, but basically it's when one specific worldview or framework of producing knowledge defines itself as objective and labels other ways of organizing society as corrupt or deficient. So corruption is not happening only in the administration or administrative level, but it can also happen in our minds. And our mind is connected to our heart. So one way that I can connect anti-corruption work to peacemaking is because peace speaks the language of heart. And as I said, heart is connected to brain. That's one reason that I'm still interested in anti-corruption work.
That's an excellent analysis. Basir, thank you so much for your time. Let me end with this, with all that you've been through and all that you're addressing today. Do you have hope or optimism that populations can both be improved and there'll be leaders that will recognize what you've discovered throughout your life, the importance, you say, of heart and peace?
As long as I be honest with myself, as long as I try to heal, as long as I appreciate connection, not only connection with other people, but also connection with myself.
Once again, thank you so much. We will make sure the audience knows where to get your Substack and anything else that you want us to be aware of. But thank you both for what you did at Marquette University and what you continue to do today. It makes a major difference. We can tell that, and we appreciate your time. More importantly, your efforts. So stay safe, and thank you so much.